you. Hey, I have my cousins here.
Excellent.
Yeah,
you packed the house.
And these are native New Yorkers, but they're mamas.
All right.
They're mamas. Their mamas are from New Orleans. So I just want to let you know we're gonna have some gumbo. I love you guys. It's good to see y'all. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. My family's here.
We could do a whole call and response for the next hour and a half.
You know what it's like to see family.
Works for me.
I mean, I've been out in the wilderness. I went to Alabama this week. It's just good to be back in the city.
Okay, we got a lot of ground to cover and a lot
I'm
of
gonna
what
let
I
you
hope will
take
be
over.
Interesting thing. No. I ask, you answer. So, Hillary Clinton lost because A, the campaign was hacked. B, because she and her people ran a bad campaign. C, both.
There's a couple. I have D, E.
Or do you have your own answer?
Of course, that's why I wrote a book, because I want people to read. Let's start with the obvious, that 2016 was a very disruptive political year. For the first time, we saw a reality TV star, Donald Trump, take the national stage and commanded just about every ounce of airtime. Most of the airtime that he commanded was in large part to get his message out and to define the other candidates. Given the landscape, I think the Clinton campaign ran a logical campaign, the kind of campaigns where you can rely on the District of Columbia and 18 states to cast their 242 electoral votes. We used to think that demography was destiny. But in this election cycle, when you have a disruptive political year, you have to run a campaign outside the box. So I think the reason why she lost the Electoral College but won the popular vote is that in many of those states, we did not have a quote-unquote ground campaign, a campaign that actually encouraged people to get out to vote, to persuade their neighbors to get out to vote, to talk to people, to talk to each other. They ran a great data-driven, algorithm-infused campaign where, Jeff, they could identify you as a white male and not call you because of your age.
Assuming I can hear the phone.
And knowing that you had a landline, God knows they left. And then but they could also look at me as a black woman, college educated, of a certain age, and not call me. And so how can you have a campaign where you're not called because of your age and demographics, and I'm not called because of my age and demographics? Then who's left? So I think in large part, when you lose by 78,000 votes in 3 states, 3 so-called reliable blue states, then there's a problem. And I think the campaign still can write their own book, and not criticize my book, not criticize other books, but they should write their own book and explain to the American people, especially Democratic voters, how they came up short in those 3 states.
In fact, the book, the title, Hacks, I think it's fair to say, has a double meaning.
That's true.
1, what the Russians did, and 2, the people who you regard as hacks.
As hacks, right.
I mentioned to you before we came out, when I was at the Philadelphia convention and talked to as many of the Clinton people as I can, it reinforced what you just said. I got the overwhelming sense that they were just so reliant on numbers that you know, there's a Jackie Mason joke. If you ask someone if they're happily married, you get a number. Are you happy? 22 years. In politics, no matter what you'd ask, it was, these are how many women are going to turn out. These are what we know about African Americans. So do you think part of this was just complacency? They just thought they had this thing locked because of what the numbers were telling them?
I think the numbers told a different story. It told them that, you know, Donald Trump could lose. But on October 7, 2016, I thought Donald Trump would lose myself. That's the day that the DNI and others, DHS, I shouldn't use all these 3 letters, but now I'm familiar with all 3 letters, FBI, NSA, DHS, you name it. I've got to meet all of them in 2016, including GRU, which is the Russian intelligence unit, the former KGB, if you want to know how far I can go into the alphabet. But I suspect what really happened is they had some degree of comfort with the numbers that they were seeing and the polling. But the polling was off, ladies. The polling has been off for a number of years. Why? Well, most Americans are no longer sitting at home waiting for a call from a pollster. A lot of the young people today are using, their cell phones and other methods. And I do believe that in the closing weeks of the campaign, as I kept traveling all over this country, people wanted to see more activity. They wanted more surrogates. They wanted to see either Secretary Clinton or Mr. Clinton. They wanted more activity. At the same time that all of this was going on, the lack of what I call passion, we also had this hacking. This hacking was real, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, just imagine, we're now finding out what I wrote in the book, and I wrote this book months ago. Because I saw it in real time. We're finding out that social media played a large role in perhaps undermining Secretary Clinton. Now remember, the Russians were in our database at the DNC for well over 10 months. The evidence is very clear. We have, well, my friend, I've seen more evidence presented, not just from members of Congress, but the evidence that we presented, the DNC presented through our own service and all of our technology. We had nothing but evidence. But the evidence that you can go back to Estonia and see how the Russians have been doing this in Western country after Western country with the Brexit vote as well as our vote. And so with this technology, social media, also involved in the day-to-day operations of trying to target certain segments of our population. This was a firestorm for us in 2016.
Let's also be clear that what the intelligence, please.
Look, if you're a sympathizer with Mr. Putin, I'll see you next week.
Donna, don't
Please
even
go.
engage. This is not this kind of thing here.
Well,
The intelligence agencies have said they have found evidence of Russian involvement. That is not to say that they have found evidence of who. All right, folks, I'm sorry,
it is
but
an act of war.
this is the part that we don't. Free, open exchange is great. Disruptive, I don't care. Left, right, center, up, down is not. The great thing about this place is civility, so thanks. All right. Let's turn our attention back here. But here's one key question.
Thank you, by the way, those of you who...
Would a different campaign have been able to successfully deal with the hacking?
No, I don't think we had the technology to deal with the hacking. I don't think we were prepared for the hacking, in large part because, what are the defense mechanisms for a hacking? We now know that we need to have more critical defense infrastructure. We now understand the severity of the hacking, what can be hacked, what can be stolen. Look, up until this past year, we've seen data breaches at major corporations. We've seen data breaches in the film industry, what happened with Sony. But this was a data breach that went beyond just stealing our emails. They tried to get into all of our data files, our donor files. And remember, the Democratic Party, we had the White House. And so for you, the average citizen who wanted an Easter egg ticket and couldn't get one through your member of Congress, you had to come through the DNC. And we learned when some of the hacking occurred that ordinary people also got entangled in that.
But it would have helped,
hacking.
wouldn't it, if when the FBI first called, whoever took that call understood how serious it was. And it might have helped if the FBI had walked a short distance over and said, folks, you got a problem. Part of this was there was a months-long gap in attentiveness.
We learned that Cozy Bear, and by the way, I don't know about you all, but I don't have any particular affection for bears, Cozy or Fancy, and they were the names of the Russian systems that were in our quote-unquote service. And remember, this started out as an ordinary phishing campaign, phishing, where you open up one of these little, oh, it looks good, let's open it up, and then you're like, oh, okay. And then 2 weeks later, you find out that somebody has been in your system, and they can actually pretend to be you and spoof you. And so you cannot go to Staples, Jeff, and buy the kind of ransomware, malware, spyware. And if you go to Best Buy, you should not go to the Geek Squad, you should go to the management. What happened was the FBI went to our vendor. They did not contact Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the chair, and also a sitting member of Congress, which I found odd, that they did not go to a sitting member of Congress. Had they come to me as the vice chair, I would have ran down the street screaming.
Indeed.
Indeed, when I was briefed, I wanted to run straight to the Pentagon. I'm like, why am I going back to the DNC? We should put yellow tape around it.
Okay, so let me take a leap here. This is under investigation by both houses of Congress with varying degrees of bipartisanship. If either branch of the Congress were to conclude, we can now definitively show, I'm leaving Trump out of this completely for the moment, that there was an active, ongoing effort by the Russians to disrupt the campaign to the detriment of one candidate, Clinton, and the benefit of another, what's the remedy?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing that many people will scream out is impeachment, right?
No,
but
not if Trump's not involved.
But that's what everyone is saying now: impeachment, impeachment, impeachment. Yeah. No, I do think that we need to have Congress as well as the administration. First of all, let's start with Mr. Trump and the administration. They have to acknowledge what happened. He has not acknowledged it. I mean, he has said, yeah, but he continued to call the investigation a witch hunt and a hoax. It's not a witch hunt, nor is it a hoax. So I think the administration has to acknowledge it. We have to take prudent steps, working with our allies to build up our cyber defenses. If the Russians, think about it, if the Russians can get into our system, as they did in 2016, what will happen next year if another nation decides to hack us? Perhaps they won't, attack our election system. Suppose they attack our online banking system or our electrical grids. We have so many more vulnerabilities that we have not paid attention to. Now look, I've been hacked by the Chinese through the Office of Personnel Management, and now the Russians through the election system. I don't want the North Koreans, anyone else. I'm not out here trying to start World War whatever. But I am really worried about our cyber defenses. And many of you who are opening up your cell phones today or going on your computer tonight, and some of you like to go to those conventions and grab those little thumb drives and just stick them in. I mean, can you imagine just sticking in something in your computer without knowing, where it originated and what spyware or malware might be on that thumb drive, and then you go to your office and impact your entire system. We see in many, many countries today more cyber, what I call cyber steps to ensure that data is protected. We need to do the same thing here in America. We have not really begun to turn the page because we're still investigating what happened.
I should mention the details of what happened are discussed in great length in this book, which, as you heard, and I will remind you again, Ms. Brazile will be signing books after. Also want to remind you, the gentleman walking around with cards, that's because we take, for reasons that you might have discovered a few minutes ago, we prefer written questions to statements preceded by a short comment that usually begins after the earth cooled. Anyway, so if you've got questions, put them there. So I want to turn to broader stuff, but there are a couple of things where your book, I think, has caused some no little controversy and maybe even confusion. So we can clear this up in a few minutes. There is a point in this book where you describe calling Bernie Sanders to say, I have to apologize to you. I found the cancer. This Democratic National Committee was tilted, rigged. And a couple of pages later, you say, no, I think you say, Hillary Clinton won this nomination fair and square. So was the Democratic National Committee essentially in Secretary Clinton's pocket, or by and large, did she win this nomination by simply getting more votes than he did?
She won it by getting more votes, period. Secretary Clinton could not control the primary process in New York. She didn't write the rules for who could vote. That is up to the New York State government, just like it is in D.C. and Louisiana. I've been on the Rules Committee now for over 30 years. I think I'm still on it. I'm trying to get myself kicked off. I mean, you write a book and you talk about people and they still want you to come on, right? But when I served as Al Gore's campaign manager, Al Gore announced in September 1999 that I would serve as his campaign manager. I immediately stepped aside as co-chair of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. Why? Because I didn't want then Senator Bill Bradley to think that we were trying to tip the scales. I promised Bernie after the release of the WikiLeaks emails right before our convention that I would go department by department. I would, basically find out, did a forensic examination of whether or not anything inappropriate happened. Now, I took that on myself. I called Bernie's campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, to come over to the DNC to join me, and I concluded after almost 5 weeks on the job that I found the cancer. And the cancer was as disturbing as anything I've seen in modern politics. And the cancer was this joint fundraising agreement, which we have records. I mean, the candidates typically sign this after McCain-Feingold, 2004. So we didn't have a joint fundraising agreement in 2000 when Al Gore was, because we still had soft money. In 2004, we had a joint fundraising agreement with John Kerry, 2008 with Barack Obama and other candidates, and then, of course, in 2016, the candidates signed it, but Hillary agreed to raise money into the joint fundraising agreement, and then there was an additional memorandum that I found.
That she would be able to, her campaign.
I still, to this day, don't know what Hillary actually, I read a book. In fact, I read it twice because I have to write a syllabus for my class next semester. So I read it the first time for knowledge and information, the second time so I can turn it into a syllabus for my students. But in reading her book, I don't have any knowledge that she knew. There was a memorandum of agreement that was a separate memorandum that went from Robbie Mook, who was Hillary's campaign manager, to Amy Dacey, who was the CEO of the DNC. Now, as an officer of the DNC, I should have known that this secondary agreement, but we were not told, and that was the cancer.
Two other quick things. This is a conjecture. Sanders supporters insist that if he'd been the nominee, he could have beaten Trump.
We don't know that.
Okay. Second, there's a point in your book where you're watching Secretary Clinton stumble at the 9/11 memorial, and you say you thought about replacing her as a candidate. Did you, as the chair of the DNC, have the power to replace a candidate?
Both in the charter of the DNC as well as the bylaws of the convention, the chair shall, in consultation with, and then I consult with, say, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and members of the DNC. The reason why this came to my attention was after we saw the video, when the video went viral, I spent most of that morning trying to figure out what was wrong. I mean, I know Hillary. I wanted Hillary to win. I mean, I became chair the second time in my life because of a hacking. I just want to ask a simple question. Who in the hell goes into a building knowing that you're getting attacked by the Russians and you spend the next 7 months of your life? I wanted her to win. God knows after giving up everything, I wanted her to win. But when she stumbled that day, and this became a viral conversation, and in Politico, the former chair of the DNC, Mr. Fowler, said that the chair should begin to think about convening a DNC.
But you'd have needed the votes of the DNC to do this,
Well,
right?
the DNC, remember, she is the nominee of the Democratic National Committee.
Yeah.
It's not reverse.
Yeah, I understand.
The DNC is the body. We are the body. I'm a member of the Democratic National Committee. She's our party's nominee. And so it is the chair who shall consult.
Okay.
Not the vice chair, not the Clinton campaign, the chair. I was chair of the entire Democratic National Committee, from the candidates who were running for city council all the way up to the candidates.
Well, it would have made for an interesting news story.
Well, I kept it to myself.
Yeah.
I did not seek the counsel of the people who called.
Understood.
Me. But the day after the video went viral, when I knew that she was well, not only did I put those rumors out, I went on TV and to let everyone know that she was going to get back on her feet, and that while her trip to California had been postponed, Hillary would get back on her feet. I also say in the book that when I saw her later at the first debate, she looked good, and she did a better job than Donald Trump, who looked like he was ready for a gang fight.
Now, let's turn to the party that you have served for so long and whose current condition is not the best. In the book, you talk about the dysfunction inside the Democratic Party.
Yes.
And you say, as I saw it, we had three Democratic parties, the party of Barack Obama, the party of Hillary Clinton, and the weak little vestige of the committee. And you talk about the legacy that both Clintons and Obama have left that severely damaged the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Let's talk about that. Why is the Democratic Party right now, in terms of the power it holds, at the weakest condition it has been in since roughly 1929? And this didn't just happen this last year. We've talked about this over the years. How far back does this condition go?
And the reason why I said I was in Alabama on this week, I was in Virginia before that election. I'm no longer chair of the party, but I have 40 plus years in this process. And I'm not afraid to go anywhere. In fact, I can go everywhere. I can go, I've been all but one state, and that's Montana. And now that we've elected a black mayor in Helena, I might be heading there, because I hear he's good. It's simple. The Republicans invest millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, in building a bench. In the 1990s, while Bill Clinton was serving in the White House, the Republicans began to retool the operation. I went to the Democratic Party in 1988, and I said, there's something going on with redistricting. And back then, I was in a car. I didn't like flying. I used to drive everywhere. And I went from Virginia all the way to Texas, and I said, the Republicans are cutting a deal with big city lawmakers to basically eliminate moderate Democrats. And I said, we better watch out, because we're going to lose the South within the next 10 years. By the time Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie got into the RNC, they retooled it. They began to invest substantial money in all of these states. Even D.C., they used to put money up in D.C. I'm like, damn, that's a waste of money. But they put money in D.C., they put money in Hawaii. And remember, they had Linda Lingle for a chance as governor. And so the Republicans took a different approach to investing everywhere. And along with ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, they had a program that trained and targeted lawmakers. We Democrats look to 18 states, D.C., and maybe every now and then we will find an expansion state and send them a few bones. And as we began to lose control of the Congress and the Senate, many of those states received less and less attention from the Democratic Party. Howard Dean was, in my judgment, one of the best chairs we ever had at the DNC.
The 50 states?
Yes, because he invested money everywhere. He sent money to Louisiana. He sent money to Texas. He sent money, up here to even so-called blue states. But over the years, we haven't put money in New York. Unless the New York Democratic Party invests in it, we haven't put money in New Jersey until this year when we have a gubernatorial. And so the reason why we're so weak and that we've lost so many seats, 600 state legislative seats under Bill Clinton, 900 under Obama, the reason why is because we're not investing money. You cannot, nothing from nothing equals nothing, right?
I went to Bronx Science, that sounds right.
Well, I'm from Louisiana, yeah. But the point I'm making is that's why I was in Alabama the other day. When was the last time we put any big money into Alabama?
You know why I think this is so...
1986, when I was there helping Richard Shelby. And now he's a Republican, who, by the way, did not vote for, he wrote in a candidate, he did not vote for Roy Moore.
The reason why I think this is so important, for particularly this audience to hear, because it tilts ever so slightly to the port side, is that there's a conviction among a lot of people I talk to that this is all about gerrymandering and voter suppression, and those are real issues. But you can't gerrymander a state legislature until you win it in the first place. North Carolina used to, but it was Democratic, used to have the most accessible voting rules of almost any state in the country. And you can't gerrymander governorships and Senate seats, which Democrats have lost a ton of.
Right.
I seem to remember that a decade ago or more, the Republicans launched something called Project Red Map, just to your point, investing money. And when I talked to you about this a couple of years ago, you had a very, I thought, tough but right point that It's not glamorous for a lot of Democrats to go to cocktail parties on Martha's Vineyard in East Hampton for state legislative candidates. They want to meet Obama, they want to meet Clinton, they'll probably want to meet Harris and whoever else. But, can we get some money to turn 3 seats in Ohio? Is that
not sexy enough? And that's why we don't have a bench. That's why 2018 is going to be a very important year for the Democratic Party. I see a great awakening happening. And unfortunately, we had to lose so much ground. Look, Maryland has a Republican governor, a Republican governor in Maine, a Republican governor in Michigan, a Republican governor in Ohio, a Republican governor in Illinois. If we can't flip this map, if we cannot run credible Democratic candidates in these so-called blue states, then shame on us. We can't blame this on Donald Trump, and we got to go beyond just impeach Donald Trump. We got to go back to the basics. We got to talk to people where they live, where they work, and they play and they pray. If we don't talk to people, people don't hear our message. And if people don't hear the sound, they can't hear the music.
I think it's a bit of doggerel. I think that Clinton quotes goes something like, "They won't care how much you know unless they know how much you care." It's kind of corny, but it gets at something. So did Virginia encourage you? Was there something that happened in Virginia that says to you, okay, we Democrats, that tells us something about 18?
Well, yes, 2 things happened in Virginia that didn't happen even 4 years ago. First of all, we fielded candidates in every state legislative district. We fielded candidates. And I'll never forget months ago when people said to me, I can't believe y'all are fielding an Asian American woman in Northern Virginia. Okay, and guess who went and campaigned for her? I did, and she won, the first Asian American woman ever elected in Virginia legislature. Okay, we fielded openly gay candidates, and we backed them because people have not had a chance to go out and vote for something, and so they don't go and vote. They don't vote. Turnout improved across the board, and by the way, it rained that day, and people still turned out. Justin Fairfax is he's an African American male. He is now the lieutenant governor in the state of Virginia. He worked on the Gore campaign. I hired him to be Tipper's briefer, and now he's the lieutenant governor. I'm so proud of him, and I raised money for him because the Democratic Party and some of the other groups out there refused to raise money for him unless he signed some petition saying he would not run for governor. I said, don't you sign that. I'll raise money for you.
There is quite an internal debate roiling in your party about direction. There are those who say,
I've been there before.
We got to go left.
I've been there.
We don't want to pale carbon. There are people who say, we've got to try to reach and win back the white working class that we've lost. And then you hear people say, no, they are so mired in a kind of racial and grievance that's hopeless. And we've got all these new people. The millennials are coming up. Let's do that. So let me start with a specific. Can a Democrat be pro-life and still be a good Democrat?
I've known many of them. In fact, I supported one in 2015. He's now the governor of the great state of Louisiana. His first act as governor was to expand Medicaid in my beloved Louisiana. If that's not pro-life, what the hell is pro-life? So we have a lot of Democrats. I know that's a litmus test issue. I am Catholic and I'm pro-choice, but I have a lot of friends in my judgment, who are very progressive. But on this issue, they are not with us.
Well, Senator Casey of Pennsylvania may be
Senator Casey's another one. Harry Reid was another one.
Yeah, but Reid never voted that way.
I know.
Casey did.
I know. But there are many.
Okay.
For me, I believe that women deserve access to the full range of reproductive health services.
So there are positions that, I don't know whether or not, I find it a little odd. If a candidate had the position on gay marriage that Clinton and Obama had back in 2008.
I was for gay marriage before both of them.
That's what I mean. They were saying marriage is between a man and a woman. If somebody were to hold that position...
You see, Jeff, let me just tell you something. No, of course it matters, especially when you're running for office. I've been ahead of most of the candidates I've ever worked for. But I didn't work for Mary Landrieu because she was going to agree with me 100% of the time. Okay. She was the best I could get out of Louisiana. And she's damn sure better than the people we have there now.
Then the successor is what you meant to say.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are going to eliminate health care for millions of Americans, a tax cut for the wealthy, a big hole in a deficit. No. And they're going to come after Social Security and Medicare, you know, some 9 years before I'm ready, eligible. I mean, I'm ready to go back out there and fight.
But one of the arguments is, look, Democrats have been making this argument forever that, you know, you're voting against your interests when you vote Republican.
True.
And yet, more than ever before, I think, in this election, white working class folks, which is defined, you know, as people without a college education at a certain income level, voted overwhelmingly for Trump, particularly in those critical states. Now, the idea that the Democratic Party cannot make an argument that you just made and succeed, for some people says, you know what? They're not voting on economics. They're voting racial and cultural grievance, and that's more powerful, and we will be wasting our time, at least for the short haul, trying to win them back. We've got to rally the millennials, rally the coalition of the ascendant, rally whatever. So do you think that there is a message that can win back what used to be core Democratic voters who now overwhelmingly, apparently, the last group overwhelmingly behind this president?
Absolutely. I don't think we need to, I don't want to do battle with, do I want black people over here or do I want white people over there? I want everybody. We cannot afford as a party nor as a country to go out there and single out who we want in our coalition. Our electoral coalition has to be broad, our outreach has to be long, and our message has to be inclusive. We can do that. Look, we have to make sure that any American who lives what I call on the outskirts of hope can find their path back to the circle of opportunity. It's the Democratic Party that is going to provide that hope. We are going to choose hope, choose action. Jeff, I do believe that we will have a message that will resonate to those who live in the suburbs as well as the inner city. We cannot pick and choose our voters. Our voters, our coalition is too broad, too long. If Barack Obama can do it in 2008 and 2012, I do believe that we can do that in 2018 and beyond.
Here's the counter-argument. So Bill Clinton, who was the last Democrat to do really well with this group in relative terms, said to people, I know the jobs aren't coming back, but we'll have a lot of retraining. Right? And that was Obama's message for 8 years. And at least for some of these people, if they weren't simply driven by racial grievance, misogyny, whatever, looked and said, you know, that hasn't happened.
Yes.
Those promises were not fulfilled. And that it wasn't so much voting against their economic interest as it was voting against the people who had promised them that they would not be left behind and didn't keep the promise.
Well, look, go back to what Donald Trump said on August 19th last year. What the hell do you have to lose? When Donald Trump said that, I went crazy. I'm like, oh my God, you know what he's saying? He's saying to not just those, the black voters that he was addressing that evening in Detroit, I believe, or Philadelphia. He was saying that to white voters too, who voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012. What the hell do you have to lose? Democrats promised you, but they didn't do this. Donald Trump had the perfect message in a year where I think the majority of voters were anti-establishment, anti-Washington. They didn't care about his lack of experience and how unfit. They thought he was going to go in there and turn the tables over because he's rich enough, he didn't have to fight for himself. He was going to fight for them. And what is he doing? He's fighting for himself. He's all about himself. And we have to make sure that these voters understand that he promised you the world and more, and all he's doing is enriching himself, his friends, and he doesn't give a damn about you. We got to go back and tell him the straight up truth. And there's nothing in that tax bill, ladies and gentlemen. I've read every copy I can get my hands on. I think I've done more reading of that bill than the Republicans who voted for it. I mean, there's nothing in there that's going to grow our economy, improve our infrastructure, or prepare a new generation. In fact, if you have a kid that is about to go to college, it's going to raise tuition, it's going to blow a hole in the deficit. And for those of us who pay state and local taxes, I'm telling you, it is the worst ripoff. It's a scam, and we should be raising our voices.
Well, I thought when in 2016 that the message from a lot of the people who worked for Trump that he kept ripping them off and stiffing them on payments would work.
Me too.
But it didn't work.
Not paying his plumbers.
I know, but it didn't work.
Because nobody could hear it. Nobody, look.
Well, maybe that's an interesting point, Donna, because Hillary Clinton's campaign outspent Trump on television.
Yes, they did.
And all we saw in those ads was what a vulgar
mean.
wretched man Donald Trump was.
Yeah,
We didn't really hear these stories.
No, you're right.
Okay.
And I didn't hear them from the 527s and the super PACs. I mean, when I went out there every day, someone told me when I was down in Florida, down in Naples, and I had a young man say to me, what do I tell my mom and my dad? And I said, you tell them that Donald Trump has never paid anybody back, that he doesn't pay his bills. And the reason why he won't release his taxes is because he's hiding something. And so you tell your mom and dad what you will tell me if I didn't pay you, that I stiffed you. Tell him he's going to stiff him. I think the Democrats will be able to make that argument in 2018. Well, we got 338 days. Why not try?
As we well-trained professional journalists say, only time will tell.
Amen. But you know what? Can I say something? I mean, you're old school. I'm old school.
Yeah.
Old school meaning you do your homework. He has 5 pieces of paper to give me all these questions. And I haven't had to open my book once. I haven't even thrown the book at this man
My
yet.
fantasy football picks, but
I
go
know.
ahead.
Hey, last I checked, the Saints were
All
beating
right.
the Panthers. But you do your homework. But last year, so many journalists were eager, if not excited, to just write what Donald Trump was saying. I mean, Donald Trump controlled the media down to 140 characters. I used to show up at ABC, not far from here, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, studying all week and all of these big topics. And then he would tweet and call in from wherever his ivory tower is.
Yeah. No, and
the media let him do it.
There's going to be a lot of accountability about that.
Well, the media has to take a look at themselves. The Democratic Party has to do our job, too.
But I wanted to ask you about your party in another direction.
All right.
And that has to do with age. When you look at the people who people are talking about, we just had the only person who was older than Donald Trump, I think, ever to run were Bob Dole. I'm sorry, then Hillary Clinton were Trump and Dole. Joe Biden thinking maybe he'll run again. He'll be, I think, 77 or 78.
But 70 is the new 50.
I know, yes. You know what? Forgive me. Lewis Black has a great line about that. He says, no, 70 is not the new 50. 50 is 50. That's why they call it math. So all this stuff about the new 50. But the point is, you got Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. Some people think maybe Ms. Clinton going to run again. Who are the younger faces in the Democratic Party? I know we're leaping to not the grassroots here, but who is around that credibly?
Well, first of all, we should not be picking a candidate in 2017. 2018 is going to be a huge year. We have a bunch of governors that are going to be up for re-election and a bunch of new governors who are going to take the stage. I am confident that you're going to see a bunch of new faces in 2018. Florida, I mentioned those other so-called, blue states where you now have Republican governors. We have a bunch of people running in Maryland that I'm pretty excited about. Illinois. So we have not just Democratic governors that we're going to be able to look at. And you got one here, I think your governor. You got a senator who said that she's not interested, but that's what they always say. But when you ask them the first time. And right next door in New Jersey, you have Cory Booker. I mean, back home in Louisiana, my mayor, Mitch Landrieu, who is leaving office after 8 great years, he's interested. Maybe he's not. Eric Garcetti, Kamala Harris from the great state of California. I like Tammy Duckworth from the state of Illinois. I think we're going to have a big bench. By my last count, I think we're about 51 or 52 people who might be testing the water sometime after the midterm election next year. We should not reward anybody, ladies and gentlemen, based on their name recognition or the fact that they've been in service for the last 30, 40 years. We should reward them based on their ideas and their willingness to campaign all across this country to get their votes, to get people excited about voting again in America.
Okay. Now, there's one, before we turn to these questions, which look pretty interesting.
You can give them to me. I like to handle questions.
I know you do.
I have a history.
Well, I have a question, and then we're going to go to their
And then I
question.
can always share them with everybody else, because I like to do that, too.
That is the issue that is kind of, in the last 9 or 10 weeks, reared its head, and in the political world too. What should the U.S. Congress, what should the House of Representatives do about John Conyers? What should the Senate do about Al Franken? And are the acknowledged behaviors of Donald Trump ever going to come back and bite him in different areas? Let's take it one. John Conyers, Nancy Pelosi, who called him an icon about a week ago, now says she wants him out, wants him to resign. James Clyburn, the most, third-ranking Democrat in the House, easily the most powerful African-American in the Congress, he wants him out. You want him out?
I do believe that Mr. Conyers is going to have to step aside. Now, let me just say something, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like to play this game. You know, oh, we got a couple Democratic men. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, people have said, what about Bill Clinton? I'm like, okay, what about Clarence Thomas? I mean, how far back are we going to go? I mean, how far back are we going to go? Sexual harassment is a pervasive problem across all industries, across the workplace, and we should have a zero tolerance. Even in the Congress, they have one of the most, I'm a former congressional staffer.
Ineffective, would you say?
Oh my God. I mean, first of all, if you accuse your member or your boss of sexual harassment, by the time you get to the complaint stage, you're exhausted. I mean, there's no real process. And so in the case of John Conyers, Mr. Farenthold, or Mr. Barton, who said, well, it was consensual sex, I mean, let's stop naming names and really come out with some concrete policies. I think the Ethics Committee and the House need to give us a full and complete report on all of these members, not just those who have been caught or you know, the accusers are finally willing to stand up. And by the way, I believe these women. It's a lot of trauma. It takes a lot of courage to speak up, to come forward with your truth. I mean, look at me just writing a little book. And people go, you know what? So yes, I do believe that we need to have the Ethics Committee do a complete investigation. We need to know all of these settlements that have occurred over the last 10 years on Capitol Hill. If we want to go back further, fine. But I think for now, Congress needs to take a look at their own rules and make sure that their rules are in compliance with the Civil Rights Act of '64, Title VII, the EEOC Commission. And then beyond that, we need to make sure that this is not just sexual harassment only happens to the rich and famous, the Matt Lauers, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. It happens every day in the workplace. And we need to use this as a teachable moment so that we can stop this from happening. Harassment of any kind is bad, but sexual harassment is the worst.
You know, when it comes to Al Franken, where the stories are, I hate to do this on a kind of grade of, you know, from really bad to horrendously bad to criminal, but you think he can he hold his seat in the Senate? I should not say hold his seat.
Well,
actually, that's
no.
Given, sorry.
I do believe that the Senate investigation is now started. I think his colleagues have been very clear that they want a full examination, and let's see what happens after that.
And the Trump thing, I mean,
well, Trump
it did surprise some of us. All right, you know what?
No, what I'm saying is that he just denied that he was on tape after we saw him in Living Color. I mean, his hair is distinguished. Everybody knows it was Trump. His voice. I mean, he's still denying that he started the birther movement. I mean, I don't know. Trump is off the chains. He lies so much now. Every day is another fact check, and I don't know.
Well, my theory is that you got to go look.
Oh, here we go. Oh God.
Sir, we're going to get to questions. This is not the way we do it here. Sorry, not the way we do it.
Sir, I wish this is, no, I'm not going to engage it.
You know,
I'm not going to engage.
It's all right. Look, you know, think about this, folks. If this was 1935.
Peace, honey.
If this was 1935, you'd have the Stalinists, the Trotskyites, and the Social Democrats all throwing oranges at each other. This is relatively civilized. All right, knock it off, will you, buddy? Just knock it off. It's rude, it's crude, it doesn't get your point. There's one or a couple of very tough questions in here that Ms. Brazile will answer the right way. All right? Bye. Shh. Why don't you listen? Might be a good idea. Might be good. It might be interesting. Okay, first question to you. I should have asked you this one. Did you give Secretary Clinton questions before the Sanders debate?
You know, I said in the book, and I have a very long chapter on this, because this was one of those issues that came up after WikiLeaks put out the emails. WikiLeaks did one thing that most Americans probably don't know, but you'll learn pretty soon after you see more evidence of how some of the work with some of the people. WikiLeaks put out only the emails that sowed discord between the campaign and Bernie Sanders. And so what you saw were my emails to Secretary Clinton. I could not verify whether or not they were my emails because they were John Podesta's emails. And because Podesta didn't confirm or deny it, I said in the beginning, let me go out there and find my emails. When I couldn't get home to find my emails before CNN called, I said, here's what I know. I did two things. I helped to expand the number of debates and town hall meetings. CNN, of course, was one of the media outlets that received them, but I also said that we would expand it with what I call different voices. We wanted to have some diversity. And yes, I worked to give all of the campaigns heads up. Jeff, we're in the middle of a very contentious debate, and we had the campaigns saying that they wanted more debates. We had Debbie saying that she did not want to enlarge the number of debates. I enlarged the number of debates, and we decided, take a look at the questions that are in question, the questions that are in questions. We talked about the death penalty. We talked about the Flint water crisis. We talked about mass incarceration, criminal justice reform, and I gave all of the candidates heads up on what we would be discussing. CNN did not provide questions because CNN was not interested in those questions. Those questions came from Roland Martin and myself and others working to expand the number of debates and to ensure that everybody had an opportunity to address these issues.
But you did express contrition for something.
Why? Because I had to.
Okay.
And you know why I had to? Because I'm a good Catholic girl. I know how to go to church and say, bless me, Father, I've sinned, what about you? But I expressed contrition because I could never find those questions. And the reason why is because my DNC emails and all of my DNC materials were not just hacked, but they were destroyed. And so all I had was what WikiLeaks put out there, and I could not verify it.
Okay, now, you remember we were disrupted earlier, but there is somebody here who wrote out the way to do it, a question about the whole racking, and I want to read it, if I can, because the handwriting is small.
All right.
Given the fact that no evidence has been presented which supports the theory that Russians hacked the DNC emails, and the fact that William Binney and the Vietnam intelligence professionals for sanity have proven this assertion that the Russians did not hack the emails, why do you continue to accuse Russia of such a serious charge? Some have declared it to be an act of war. Do you want a war with Russia? The last sentence probably could have been eliminated and made the argument better.
Ladies and gentlemen, I walked into the DNC after learning that we were hacked, severely hacked. I conducted not just an investigation that we had to pay for, but we also cooperated with those who had an understanding of where the spyware, the malware, and what was happening to our system. So it's not as if we walked into the office and noticed that our cell phones, all of our external drives were corrupted, that our machines had been, quote unquote, co-opted. This malware, this spyware, yes, it was traced to Russian operatives, Russian intelligence sources. I had no knowledge of this. This was not my degree. This is not what I was looking for. If anybody has ever seen anything I've ever written, and I've written a lot, I used to write a weekly column. Anyone ever seen me on television? I spent 14 years as a TV commentator. I'm not out here trying to start a war, but I'm going to tell you one thing, since the war has already been started. I want to protect my country. What they did to us in 2016 was wrong. What they have tried to do in other Western nations is wrong. This is about Mr. Putin being strongly opposed to Hillary Clinton. He went after her. He tried to discredit her and sow discord within our country. Anytime someone pays for campaign ads in rubles, not dollars, not francs, rubles, and that those rubles are paid advertisement to sow even more confusion and more discord, Don't come to me and ask me what proof do I have. You go to Google and Facebook and Twitter and let them show you the proof that they have. Who paid them? Which is why they've had to turn over these ads. Now, when these federal agencies came to us and told us what to look for, we initially did not give them our survey. We didn't know who to trust. Let's be honest. We didn't know. But once we hired a forensic team that understood hacking, understood how data was being compromised and stolen, we had nothing but proof. And we shared that proof with our government to make sure that they understood what was at stake. And all you have to do, Jeff, is look at the Brexit campaign, look at what happened this year in Western European country, go back to Estonia, go back to the Ukraine. This is one way in which Mr. Putin is trying to advance his interests in Russia.
What's interesting
and we better get smart about it, because next year, if it's the North Koreans, turn off your lights, going after your online banking. Don't come and ask me what proof. You better protect yourself with a two-step verification process. You better make sure that everything you put in your machine is legitimate. You better make sure that every time you turn on your cell phone that you have a proper password. And those of you who are using password lowercase, that's not a good password. So there are prudent steps that you should take, and I also identify those in the book as well.
What's interesting about that answer is a few months ago I talked to two young Russians now living in Poland who cover via the web what's going on inside Russia, and their explanation for what the Russians did, and they absolutely believe the Russians would. It wasn't that necessarily that they wanted Trump to win. What they wanted to do was to undermine any notion that America had a functioning, stable, effective system.
Right.
That you guys were just as bad as we are. That was the goal of a lot of what they did. Now, the way they did it was to undermine the person that they were sure was going to win, right, so that when Clinton won, she would be without legitimacy.
And you know, can I add to that? I mean, take a look at the emails, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, the DNC has 150 staffers, consultants galore. And why did you only read a handful of quote-unquote emails? Why were the emails timed for the nightly news? Why did a certain candidate amplify whatever talking point came out that day from the email? This was an orchestrated campaign. As I said, it was an orchestrated hit.
Let's move on. Mayor, Ms. Brazile, could you please share how black women in low-income communities what do they need to do to be heard from now forward?
They need the same thing that white women, Hispanic, and everybody else. They need opportunity, they need good jobs, good wages. They also need to make sure that they can afford to live in the communities in which they are currently residing in, and they also need to ensure that their communities are safe. They want candidates like everyone else who will improve their lives and their livelihoods. And let me just say this.
Yes?
I gotta say this. Now, y'all know, when it comes to the Democratic Party, we are the lifeblood of the Democratic Party. 95, 96% of black women. I mean, if you look at the amount of money we spend, Jeff, every 2 years, every 4 years, and we spend multiple millions of dollars. Black women probably get about maybe $1.35 in terms of advertising money, in terms of persuasion money. It's unfair, but we know what to do. And it has always bothered me that so little money is spent on persuading black women to do much more. I got criticized by somebody in the Clinton campaign, and they were just throwing shade. But I got criticized for sending money down to Louisiana and Alabama and all these places. I said, well, first of all, anybody know about how folks migrated? If you put some money in Louisiana or Alabama or Georgia, whatever, they're going to call it. Guess what? Barack Obama just called me. Now, you know when you got, it's like Luther Vandross is back. Girl, I heard from Luther, Teddy. You know, or, you know, for a white woman, I'm sure it's akin to having Elvis back, okay, whatever, whoever. But my point is that you have to motivate people. If you don't know how it works, then you shouldn't be on the political stage. I mean, all my adult life, I've known how to motivate people to get out to vote. And by the way, when I was a little kid, I was less than 23 years old, and I worked on a campaign to make Dr. King's birthday holiday. We didn't have any money. We had the grapevine and Stevie Wonder, who did the song, and we got that. We had 7 million signatures, and Ronald Reagan signed it, although he was opposed to it. That's how politics is supposed to work.
Why do we still have the Electoral College? This is a pretty easy answer, but you give yours.
Every time the winner of the Electoral College loses the popular vote, I get to go to Harvard, so I'm at Harvard this semester. I love Harvard, but I think it's time for us to take a second look at it. It's a relic of the Civil War times. Beyond that, I don't know why we need it. I think there are now states that are looking at abolishing the Electoral College, and when I finish my democracy project at Harvard, I'm going, that's going to be my next reform campaign.
You wouldn't have had a country, okay, you would not have had a United States without it.
Right.
That's the first thing. Because the smaller states insisted on it, along with equal representation in the Senate. Why do we have that? Because it's the one, here's something you can win a lot of money if you go to a nerd bar. Ask people what's the one part of the Constitution that can't be amended. It's the part that says every state has equal representation in the Senate. That's the deal. Now, there is this plan, this 270 compact, in which states are supposed to agree, if states with 270 electoral votes or more sign on, that they will deliver their electoral votes to the national popular vote winner, no matter what happens in their state. We're not really close to getting 270. It's not entirely clear it's constitutional for reasons I won't bore you with. But getting rid of the Electoral College, while it may seem like a great idea, having written a novel about this that was less weird than what happened, ain't going to happen.
I think we're at 165 electoral votes now, and it's only blue states.
I suppose if in 2018 the Democrats win, like, Texas and Florida, good luck on that.
Right. I'll take Michigan and Illinois. I'll take all those states.
This follows up on what we talked about, and we've read this and heard this in recent days. We now know that many men who covered the campaign have been exposed as sexual harassers of women. How do you think these powerful men influence the tone and coverage of the campaign?
Well, there's no question. I mean, again, if you read what happened, Secretary Clinton's book, the misogyny was outrageous. The misogyny in 2008, the misogyny that we've seen year after year after year, where a woman, often people talk about her clothes, her hair. I got so tired of talking about her clothes, her hair. Her tone of voice, that's the one that used to get to me. I'll never forget one. You were not on CNN that night when in 2008 when someone complained that she had cried. I mean, this is after Mitt Romney did an entire handkerchief of tears, and someone complained about her crying. They said, and they alluded to the fact that she might be postmenopausal. You were not, I know exactly what it was.
2008 was a different network, but I remember this.
2008. Yeah. 2008. And I looked at it, I was the only woman on the panel, and I'm like, excuse me? That is not postmenopausal. But yeah, there was a hell of a lot of misogyny. There was just a lot of chatter about, the other one was likable. I mean, I have worked for men that had a nice smile, a nice red tie and a blue suit, and no one ever talked about their likability, because it was assumed that because they were men and they had on a red tie and a blue jacket that they were fine. But every time I went on TV in 2015 up till July 2016, it was all about her likability, whether or not people will like her. And back to 2008, here I was, Donna, well, is America ready for a black person? Yes. Donna, is America ready for a woman? Yes, but I don't know about that. And then, think about 2008 and 2016. Here I am, a black woman. I can celebrate all night long because we elected our first black man, right? But 2016, the day in which she secured the nomination, I'll never forget on TV, everybody was like trying to dismiss it. This was the first time in our history. Just like 2008, this was a night of celebration, regardless of political party, right? Because this is a milestone. And it was almost as if we had to hurry up past it because it was Hillary. So yes, there's a lot of misogyny. A lot of these guys, I mean, I don't want to name names. That's a whole nother book.
Okay.
Well, you see them going down like flies. You know, I call them BSDs. Well, no. Let me use Hillary's word, karma. What goes around comes around. Payback's a bitch too.
That's both seem true.
Karma. But I have to tell you, you've always been respectful. I've known you for 30-something years. No. Let me tell you. I mean, Jeff, no, we go back a long time. And I mean, back in the day when there were only maybe 1 or 2 women on the bus, always respectful, always. And you have always treated, and you're not one of those guys who used to assume that the only thing I knew to talk about was black folks. Remember back in the day when they were like, well, she's black. And Jeff would come in and ask me, well, how are you going to do in the South? And I'm like, yes, I do know that too. And then, what do you think Gore's chances are? I mean, I know that too. I'm the damn campaign manager. But no, you know what I'm talking about.
But the truth is, I supplied Donna Brazile with Cuban cigars.
Well, we got
which is a mutual
too.
and
scotch.
And yes.
I made it to the back of the bus. I started at the back of the bus, but I got to the front of the bus because I knew what the guys were drinking and smoking. Right. Don't tell all my secrets, Victoria.
Okay.
We can't do that tonight.
I'm going to pass.
Okay, cool.
But I want to get to a couple more questions.
Because I haven't put that in my book yet. My cousins are here, Jeff. You know me telling my secrets.
Okay.
Y'all like Cubans, man. Them some good things, okay? The only reason why I went to Cuba was to get Alan Gross out of prison and grab a couple cigars, okay?
Donna?
Yeah.
Let's turn some of these questions.
Okay. I was talking to my cousin. That's Joe there. That's Joe.
I know. Look,
I love
I don't want to. I don't want to cramp your style, but you know,
my style,
I want to let these people have their say because they're
Yeah, I know.
At what point? And this kind of goes back to what we're talking about some of the reporters. At what point does reportage cross the line into, I think that's supposed to be advocacy, and become a betrayal of an assumed relationship? I guess, or maybe it's what cross the line into privacy. Yeah. Another word. Okay. I think I get it now. The question is, at what point does a reporter, let's say covering a candidate, learn something, and under circumstances in which he's asked, you're supposed to keep this private, and then says no? I think it's important the public know this. When you have a conversation with a reporter, the general rule I've heard from reporters is if you don't say this is off the record, it's not off. It's on the record.
Correct.
Is that how you regard your conversations?
I believe every time a reporter calls me, it is on the record. Although I always say this. I said because I have a distinct voice and people know if I'm going to say something. So I always say, look, I'm going to tell you what I know, and it's all on the record. But what I don't know and I feel less sure about, I'll give it to you on background until I can figure it out. And that's been my relationship. I don't want to put anybody in a position of lying. And let me tell you this, I respect journalists. I am a pundit with a partisan point of view. I never went on CNN and ABC as an analyst or a journalist, okay? I have a perceived bias. I am a Democrat, and I love my party, but I am a partisan. But for journalists who are trained to be what I call the guardians of our liberty and our free media, free press, I treat you all with the respect that is in the Constitution. And I don't tell you anything that later on in life will cause me to have any kind of problem. I can't tell you one reporter today that I can't call.
You know, but it's interesting.
Because I've always tried to level with them. And even when I found out later that what I said, even on the record, might not have been the stone cold truth, I've gone back and said, well, guess what? I learned there was something else. And you have to do that to maintain relationships. But some of the journalists today, oh my God. I have more people writing in the last couple of months that I said, where are they getting their crap from? And they know that Donald Trump is calling everybody out. And he should be called out, but nobody's going to hold him accountable. So, but I wonder when journalists are just going to get smart enough to understand they need to make sure they have their sources, they need to do their own homework, and they need to read up a little bit more before they write some of
There's
this
another side
stuff.
to this, and it may be because I misread the question, but it does raise another one. So,
Okay.
you know, traditionally you've got people like yourself who are clearly advocates, no question. You've got journalists who are, you know, just the facts, ma'am, like the old dragnet. But apart from, and so even on Fox News, there's a distinction that I make, and most people like, between their journalists,
Right.
Chris Wallace, Shep Smith, Brett Baer, and the absolute water carriers, Fox and Friends, Hannity, Ingram. But now you see in a place like CNN, some of their best journalists, Jake Tapper to take, who I respect enormously, has clearly moved in a direction of calling out particularly Donald Trump on what he sees as his falsehoods, his lies, whatever. And I wonder to what extent Trump has forced the hand of journalists. I mean, the New York Times in the campaign actually used the word lie in a headline, which that's a huge step forward. Most journalists say, well, it was false, but, you know, I don't know if he deliberately. So do you see, in some sense, Trump as kind of polarizing the media more than it used to be?
Absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump essentially wants to only talk to those media outlets that will write favorable stories. When I read a couple of months ago that they have to find clips to put near his bedside or on his desk in the morning that are favorable. I mean, come on. One day we're going to have an interesting chapter on Donald Trump and our democracy and how all of our norms have been disrupted by this president. I still can't get over the comment he made that he can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. That broke every norm. And
but it may have been the most accurate thing he said in the whole campaign.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look at the consequence of he does something, and then, you know, in the normal world, his own party would slap him down and say that you can't do this. You know, I wrote a lot of alternate histories over the years, and I was always asked last year, "You're going to do one on this campaign?" And my answer was always, "No, this is the alternate history. This is the thing that doesn't makes." If you know Superman comics, this is Bizarro World.
Yeah.
If you know Seinfeld, this is Backwards Day. Yeah. Anyway, which leads to this question: do you believe Donald Trump will serve out his term? No. I know what a lot of you think and want. I'd like Ms. Brazile to answer it.
There's a part of me that believes that Donald Trump is going to wake up one day because this cloud, that he calls it a cloud, or whatever, the hoax, the witch hunt, he's going to wake up one day and say, you know what, I've accomplished everything that I told the American people I would do, and I'm gone. I just think he's just going to we're going to wake up one morning, he's going to tweet that I've left, bye. You know, I left, and you know what? I left the remote control on the desk, and he'll leave that little note to Vice President Pence. I left the remote control on the desk, and I'm going back to my old life. So that's
okay.
it.
I mean, I remember hearing, here's what I remember and why I'm skeptical of that. He'll never run. He'll never release any of his financial records.
Nope.
He'll drop out the first time he gets it. He'll drop out the first time he loses a primary. The Republican Party will stop him at the convention. There's no possible way that he'll drop out after they access Hollywood tape, and he'll lose the election. You know this probably better than I do, but the number of people who've willingly walked away from the presidency of the United States is a fairly small number.
It's a fantasy.
Okay. Got it.
Look,
So,
I say it's a fantasy. The only way to defeat Donald Trump is to get those 90 million Americans, the 65 million that voted for Hillary Clinton, plus those 90 million who were eligible to vote, but for whatever reason stayed home last year, is to inspire them, to give them hope, and to give them an opportunity to turn out in 2018 and turn in 20. The only way to defeat Donald Trump and to remove him from office is to beat him at the election, at the ballot box. And
because
he can be beat.
Yeah,
he can be beat.
I just do think there are endless numbers of people who wake up every morning waiting for Robert Mueller to come in and say, "I got it, you're out." And you know, it's an Aaron Sorkin fantasy. I once said to Sorkin, "You'll forgive the inelegance." I said, "You write wet dreams for liberals. You write their fantasies."
Right.
And the fantasy is that the scales will fall from the eyes of who? Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, And they will wake up and say, my God, look who have, what's the line from Talking Heads, my favorite group? My God, what have I done? Well, that's not how it's working. I'm going to, just one more minute on this. It's important, I think, to understand that the most unpopular president in history at this point is presiding over exactly the change that millions of conservatives have wanted for decades.
Right.
He is doing things that Ronald Reagan couldn't do.
Right.
He is revamping the federal bench.
Right.
He is going to sign a tax bill with whichever its final scene is like every dream of Lawrence Kudlow and the supply-siders. He's going to run roughshod over environmental and financial regulations. He's going to turn the Department of Justice's views on everything from cops shooting black kids to gay rights upside down. This is working from their point of view. I realize this is working.
It's working.
And the idea that the Republicans in the Senate and the House are going to look at whatever he does next and go, oh, no, we can't tolerate that.
No.
Even though that Mike Pence is waiting in the wings, I think the way Donald Trump will be... now, there's one other thing, and it sounds really awful, but some doctor wrote about this. They took a look at what Donald Trump eats on Air Force One.
Oh, Lord.
2 Big Macs, 2 fish fillets, and a chocolate shake. That's his...
Seriously?
Yeah. It's in the Corey Landowski book. So Donald Trump may leave office in a way not anticipated by any part of the Constitution. But that's not something to hope for and something to bet on. Just one
2 Big Macs?
2 Big Macs, 2 fish fillets, and a chocolate shake. Yeah.
Wow. That's even beyond my...
You may notice that, one of the things about Trump, he loves to make fun of the way people look. Mm-hmm. And you sort of wonder if he has a mirror. That's me.
All right.
Anyway, so last question. This is a question I ask all of our guests.
Okay.
So if you come back here in, say, 5 years,
good.
Will the world be in better shape or worse shape than it is now? Are you an optimist, essentially, or a pessimist?
I'm an optimist. Because I see a great awakening happening. I mean, just the last 2 months of traveling around the country, the last 3 weeks of being on a book tour, I'm an optimist. What I saw on Tuesday, November 7th this year, again, gave me hope that we have within this country the ability to transform ourselves, to be resilient, and to come back even stronger. The election of 2016, I think, caught all of us by surprise. We assumed that a candidate who had never run for president before, someone who did not understand the quote-unquote electoral map, would fail the first time. And beyond, I'm sure, his wildest expectations as well, he won. And yes, I do believe he had help, okay? I'm just gonna put that out there. Some of you might never believe it, but I believe he had help. But the future lies with those of us who believe in the beauty of our dreams. Eleanor Roosevelt said that back in the 1930s. And we can make a difference in 2018 and beyond. We have to harness the power we have, use our political power to make the kind of changes we want to see, not just in Washington, but in our own lives wherever we may live. Why did I choose politics as a way to make change? Because I think that the men and women that we select every 2 years, every 4 years, they're our best hope to be the guardians of democracy and the protectors of our liberty and our freedoms. And if you're somebody like me who go to bed every night not knowing what our president might be up to when he get up from eating that Big Mac and good Lord, then you pray for him, but you also pray for your country, and you get back out in the streets to start organizing for the future. So I am an optimist. 5 years from now, 2018 is going to be a great year. 2019 is an off season, but 2020 and then 2022. 2022 is when we go back to the redistricting, go back to the drawing board. And so I'm an optimist. I think the next 5 years, that's the ball game for not just the Democratic Party, but for all of us who love freedom and justice and equality for all. It's the ball game.
So one of the things about Louisiana that I love is that there are experiences that you just don't get anywhere else. The food in Louisiana is just different, and their basic view is the hell with Nouvelle cuisine, and I like that. The music in Louisiana, Zydeco music, You're not going to hear it anywhere else. And the kind of public figures you get from Louisiana, just take it, tell it to you with the bark off. That's Donna Brazile.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.